Hug some Mac, you guys. We are in night 4 of Hanukkah. If you can see my menorah back there, I'm all ready to go. I like to anoint my wicks with a little bit of olive oil. Since I'm not using the olive oil lamps for candles, it's suggested that we use olive oil because that connects us with the original act of lighting the temple lanterns or candles that Moses lit as God told him to. So we make a connection to that original connection when we use the olive oil. Olive oil is used as, many times in the Bible for sacred anointing uses, for healing and consecrating and making things sacred. So olive oil has a specific sort of frequency and holiness to it. It's also associated with the dimension of Chokmah, which is opposite of Binah on the tree of life, and Chokmah is the supernal masculine and the supernal father, whereas Binah is the supernal feminine and the supernal mother. It is interesting that during Hanukkah, we are connecting to that source energy of Binah at the 8th dimension, whereas Chokmah is at the 9th dimension. The portal and gate of energy that is the outflowing of joy and sustenance and abundance comes from Binah. That's wisdom and understanding and grace and compassion and all of those good things, like the mother would give, nurturing to the vessel, right? So we connect with that storehouse of energy during certain high holidays of the year, which is the intrinsic connection, the spiritual connection. And then it's so interesting that the physical representation or the masculine association that unites the two, everything in the Hebrew mystic understanding of the spiritual technology of what is going on during the rituals is all about the divine union and marriage of the masculine and feminine, the union of spirit and material, the union of the vessel, the bride, us, the soul, with the light of the Creator, with God, the bridegroom. So it's so interesting. And it was ultimately powerful that this week's Shabbat, which is our weekly observance of that union of the bride and the bridegroom, the feminine, which is night, which is rest, which is the moon, uniting, and we join with that, uniting with the light of the Creator in that divine sacred marriage every week. And so ushering in Hanukkah is a lot like Shabbat, because Hanukkah is all about the union of the human with the divine, the material with the spiritual, the light and the dark, deepening our connection with the Creator through this time of darkness, through our direct connection with the light of the flame of the candle, so that we are brought into holy union with the Creator. And so this time during Hanukkah is like this open window in time during this particular time of the year, where we have this direct connection to that light of the Creator that is made manifest through the expression of Binah, of that energy. Okay, so tonight's episode of Secret Teachings of Jesus will be kind of like our Christmas special, where I feel like I might have done an episode like this last year. You can go back and scroll through my channel and maybe see, but every year what I like to do during this time, there's like certain podcasts and deep consciousness classes that I take either through like the Kabbalah Center, or like there's certain podcasts that Rob Bell does during Christmas, that he usually has these deep conversations with a Christian anthropologist that studied with Joseph Campbell. His name is Alexander Shaia. And I just learned today that he is a Lebanese early generation of immigrants that grew up in, he's like a priest who grew up in Birmingham, who's from Lebanon, the Middle East, who's like a gay priest in the South, I believe, is what I've understood. He may or may not be. I'm pretty sure that they were hinting about him being gay. But however, it's just like so interesting because I am also of Middle Eastern descent, and I am in the South, and I live near Lebanon, Tennessee, and Carthage. Like everywhere in Middle Tennessee is named after the Middle East. There's also a big Kurdish population here. And I think it's because like when you look at the latitude and longitude, it's like, it's kind of similar. It makes for a natural region for migration because it gives similar like geographical conditions and similar weather. And it's so funny because when I like to follow a bunch of people that are in, I guess it would be the Baltic Peninsula, in the Mediterranean and things, many times their videos look very similar. And I love watching like rural Iranian women cook. And I know that Iran is not in the Baltic Peninsula, but however, it is still like their rural countryside looks a lot like Middle Tennessee, which I think is so interesting and awesome, and it's really cool. So I'm very like tuned in and connected with that part of my DNA, and it's from my mom's side that I have my Jewish roots, and her grandfather migrated during World War I to Middle Tennessee and converted to Christianity then, but always stayed involved with the temple here. So I just think it's super cool. I'm really connected with those roots. But anyway, offshoot tangent. So this time of year, I go back and listen to these particular conversations where Alexander Shaia gives the mythical relevance of all of the aspects that we know about our Feast of Christmas as that were related to the Celtics and the original evangelizing Christianity through the Northern Hemisphere. This is not tied in to the Nordic overlays of the red and white and the hallucinogenic mushrooms and all of that. Those are other layers added into the Christmas celebrations. But so this is the Celtic overlays that tie into solstice. This is the Feast of Christmas and the significance of Christmas and those interrelationships, and then also how it pertains and relates to Hanukkah as well. So I like to just chat about this as someone who's interested, and I give you guys the footnotes of the conversations, and then I have listed in my description box below links to Rob Bell's episodes with Alexander Shaia where he breaks this stuff down. But I also have thrown in memories of, I think, like things that I have learned from either the Kabbalah Center, material for deep consciousness that prepares you for Hanukkah, or I have heard these stories told from other rabbis that teach about the deeper underlying secrets of things. So I can't remember some of the exact sources. So that is the caveat. I know that even though sometimes I give caveats, the internet police still like to come and like wag their finger and tell me I'm being reckless, but we're just here for fun. I'm not an expert, so you can do your own research. But let us begin. Okay, so I've got notes to help us stay on track because there are certain points that I want to make and I feel like they come in order. Okay. So solstice and the Christian Feast of Christmas have a lot of interlaid correlations, symbolically and mythically speaking. And then they also tie in to Hanukkah. And so we're going to talk about the origins of Hanukkah, the Christmas story and how it's interwoven into the Celtic traditions of the winter solstice. Okay, so let's begin with December 21st, which is the winter solstice. The winter solstice for the Northern Hemisphere is the darkest and longest, so it's the shortest day of the year. It's like the darkest day of the year. It's the longest night. So there's the most hours of darkness during the winter solstice. That is the shortest day of the year. The sun, so that, I can't remember the origin, like the root language that this is translated from, but solstice means sun stands still, or sun is still. So for 3 days, we have the shortest day of the year, like the sun will set at its earliest, like at 4:30. And so it is the same. It is like in this liminal space for like 3 days before we get past that solstice period where the days are their shortest and the days start growing again. So on December 21st, the solstice occurs, the winter solstice, and the shortest day of the year happens. And for 3 days, we have 3 really short days and 3 really long nights. Now, during this time, we would be at the end of our last harvest, and we probably would have planted the winter stuff, or the soil is lying void, but we're finished with the previous year. And so we're looking at several months of no new produce, of the last harvest, of thin times. And so, we were, as agricultural species, very anxious for the light to return. And so the Celts had their relationship to nature was interwoven in their relationship with their higher power, with God. That's how they understood God, was through the way that nature would express. So they would have winter rituals that would celebrate the mystery of birth to entice the rebirth of the sun and entice the rebirth of the light and vitality of the year. So they would do certain rituals to observe the celebration of the mystery of birth and life and the divine feminine. And one of the associations with the divine feminine is the dark and fertile void. Now, Binah, when you look at the tree of life, it's separated into 10 dimensions. Here, we're going to get a chart. Here's the tree of life, and it's separated into these 10 dimensions, which are the 10 governing forces of the universe and the 10 aspects of the Godhead. Up here, we have what is pure divinity. We have source, which is purely abstract light in its absolute wholeness and unity and oneness. Then the light incarnates in its first incarnation into reality right here, where God spills forth into the cosmos as light, as the supernal masculine, right? The sharing physical act of giving, of action, masculine, the supernal father here. The light is unadulterated and boundless and has no form and no purpose and no direction. And so it is then encaptured by, or snatched up, if you will, by the supernal feminine, the womb of creation, the dark fertile void, and the supernal mother. So the feminine, the womb, becomes the container that gives the masculine boundary, shape, and limitation, which also gives form and shape. So this is restriction and discipline and boundary, which brings forth life and organization and fruitfulness and productivity. So this is the union, the original OG, energetic, cosmic, molecular union of masculine, feminine, positive, negative, charges in the cosmos. Union of positive and negative, and union of masculine and feminine, the divine supernal marriage that produces life on earth. Okay, so the solstice has us in our dark and fertile void, and we are in this darkness, this dark time of year, honoring the feminine, honoring the life cycle, honoring the mystery of birth, honoring the shedding of blood, honoring the womb, and going into that darkness and the stillness and the waters, receding into the ambionic waters of creation, right? Into the void, into formlessness, where life comes, where life springs forth. So in the Hebrew tradition, water is associated with formlessness, with darkness, with void, right? When we go into the early verses of Genesis, the waters were there when the earth was without form, and spirit hovered over the waters, right? Which would foreshadow and prophesy when Jesus is baptized. The Christ, the embodiment, the second incarnation of God as the physical, goes down into the waters and is reborn and is risen, right? Goes into death and formlessness and void, and then is resurrected and reborn into new life, into new light, to new consciousness. So the sun stands still for 3 days. So during the solstice, the sun goes into darkness. The sun sets. The sun is perceived to die, right? The Celts are trying to celebrate life, to encourage the return of the sun, the rebirth of the sun. So when the Christians went to evangelize to the Celts, which were from Turkey upward in the northern hemisphere, they weren't trying to bring them anything new or take anything away, but they were trying to point out, okay, at a mythic level, this story on a cosmic level is always being told to you, and here's the way that it is proclaimed by the heavens and the earth already, that you are already finding, that you're already seeing for yourself. The death of the sun, the descent of the sun into darkness, the lingering there for 3 days is telling the story, the prophecy of the Messiah who will come, who will be the perfection of God in human form, divine and human in one, spirit perfected and material in one, that holy marriage of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit incarnate in the flesh, right? This is going to go into a death and is going to stay, like this perfection is going to be sacrificed and given for the sake of the upliftment and the redemption of mankind, of all the souls of mankind, for the sake of elevating all the souls of mankind back into the garden, back into perfection, back into paradise, into perfect union, the bride and the bridegroom in the bridal chamber, united as one. So the when something is mythically true, it's as if it is told in a non-physical place that is it's more true than true. It is so true that it has to be resounded again and again and again symbolically everywhere. And so there is this place. Here is the lower realm where we are. This is the material world. But these upper realms, they're higher dimensions. And this realm here, this is the astral realm. This is where myth is in existence. This is where dreams occur. This is where the imagination is. This is where our imagination can create thought forms. This is the passage of all souls coming and going from earth. This is where spirit, touches the material, the passage here where all things come from the spiritual and all blessings flow, this is the storehouse. So everything has to come through here, Yesod. And the moon is also associated with this Sefirot here, or this dimension. So, and this is also associated with the womb and the sexual organs on the human body, or the sacral chakra. So when things are true at a mythical level, it's like they happen here in the endless realm, in the non-physical, in the immortal realm, where they are in light body, truth, eternally true, unchangingly true, uncorruptibly true. It is when they come into the material that we have become limited. We have become, death has been introduced, that we become a physicalized, limited version of what is mythically so big, that it exceeds beyond our physical limitations. So the Adam and Eve, right, the Garden of Eden, before the fall, they were here. They were in their perfected light body state. They were as spirits and as souls, one with God, with the upper realms. But when they fell, when sin separated them from those realms, it was the cloak of shame that made them too heavy, where they fell and they became physical material beings. And it was that original sin that created that density that we then had to go through a process to reunite with that perfection. So everything is always connected. Everything from the beginning of time as we know it and existence as we know it has always proclaimed the coming of the Christ, the birth of the Messiah, the message and miracles of the Messiah, the gift of the Messiah, the demonstration, the teachings of the Messiah, and then the kingship of the Messiah, and then the death, the sacrificial death and resurrection of the Messiah. This is proclaimed within nature. This is proclaimed within the cycles of nature. This is proclaimed in myth and in legend. This is proclaimed over and over again. You know how people will point out Isis and all these different Egyptian myths and things that already have told, the story of the Christ, blah, blah, blah. It's because the story has been a prophetic, mythic level of truth that has been promised again and again and again through the ages, until it was finally physicalized when the incarnation of Christ came in the birth of Christ. So the solstice is symbolically in nature. It's nature proclaiming the truth of the birth of the Messiah, and the Messiah was the savior of mankind to end pain and suffering in the world. And so the solstice happens and the sun is in its state of stillness and inactivity and inanimation for 3 days, mimicking the sacrificial death of Christ on the cross and Christ in the tomb for 3 days before he resurrected and was reborn resurrected, bringing back the even greater radiance than when he brought forth in his original birth. It is interesting that the way that the sun calendar shifted our traditions from our connection with the Hebrew moon calendar, when we went into the Gregorian calendar, we were leaning more into the Celtic cycles, and so they got thrown off. And so during the Nicene Creed, when they were going to try to figure out what to do with Christmas because it was moving around so much, they were like, do we move it back with the solstice or do we keep it at the 25th? And what they found was, what was so beautiful was that in keeping with the truth of the nature story, telling the story of the Christ, they realized that it was after that third day, the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, on the 24th, the 3 days after the solstice, or I guess whatever it lands on, the 24th or 25th officially, that was the first day to the naked eye that we could perceive the return of the light, or the growing of the light in the day. So there was like a return of this radiance back to the world once more, the birth of the sun, the rebirth of the sun even. So interesting. So now Christmas Eve, the 24th of Christmas, was the Feast of Adam and Eve. And this was like taken out of the Christian Advent calendar during the age of the Enlightenment, which I'm not quite sure when that is, but I encourage you to like listen to all the 3 of these podcasts below. So the Feast of Adam and Eve was on Christmas Eve, and that paralleled on December 24th. I can't remember if there was the December 24th or the day before the solstice. Around this time, the Celts would decorate, and I believe it was December 24th. They would decorate the oak tree at the center of their village. They built their villages around a central oak tree because they honored the oak tree as the bringer of fire. Oak trees attract lightning. And so they honored this tree as the bringer of fire, the bringer of warmth, the bringer of essentially the source of like vitality and life that would get them through the winter. But we all know, how important fire is, especially in primitive times. So they, in this feast of honoring the mystery of birth, would decorate the barren tree with dried fruits and cloves that would foretell the return of the fruits and the vitality again once more. The bearing of fruit cyclically over and over and over, which we saw this and we thought, wow, this is so true. This is totally connected to the tree in the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but also both the tree of life. And so when Adam and Eve ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that led to their fall. But it also gave us the opportunity to be in the physical world and to have the miracle of life and the journey and the process where we just rediscover the Creator again. And so, every story that's told about and around the Gospels and around Christmas, it's always these dark scandals that you think are going to be ruinous. And it's during the darkest times that these miraculous gifts are born and these miracles come and these the good news is born and life returns and vitality and new radiance comes. So we get this in the nature cycle where we renew and we replenish, and even as human beings, we not only let the land replenish and renew, but we rest and replenish and are brought back to life after the toil of the year. The story of Mary being impregnated by divine, miracle of the angel, bringing that in. It's like no one, people didn't believe her. It was a scandal. It was like, oh, here's this unmarried woman who's having this baby, and it's like, oh yeah, it's like, she couldn't explain to everyone, well, this is the Messiah. It's like, not everybody just knew, it was just like, they just had to eat it and deal with it. And so it was to the shepherds that was brought the message of the coming of the Messiah, the Savior, the Savior that would save the Jewish people from oppression, right? But really it was talking about the Messiah that would come and save the Israelites, the seekers, the people who wanted to be connected with God and wanted that union. It was bringing them the message of redemption and of a new light, a new consciousness coming in. And so that wasn't delivered to the people in the state of holiness or royalty or high status. It was brought to people who were assigned the job of shepherd because they were the dregs of society. They were criminals, they were poor, they didn't have any other option. So they had to do the smelly job that nobody wanted, that shrouded them in a stigma of less than and outcast. So it was that good news, the announcement of the greatest moment that mankind had ever been waiting for, was brought to the lowly and the humble in the darkest and worst and most humbling place. So it comes to this time where Jesus was born during a historical time of deep and utter darkness and chaos, and mankind was in a very bleak moment. And it wasn't that during that time that they would have expected the Messiah to come. In their perception, the Messiah would come when we were in their holiness and they were aligning with the affinity of the Messiah. But it wasn't. It was when we needed that salvation the most, during the darkest times when there was like no mercy at all. And it was during these times where even the Jewish faith was being watered down and defiled by the Hellenistic period of the Greek influence coming in, with the consciousness of warring duality of opposites versus the Hebrew and even Celtic understanding of all of nature as being a holistic integration, where everything has its right place in right relationship to one another. And even in Hebrew mysticism, we understand and we learn that even the darkness and density has its place in the cosmos. Although it's not meant to stay in its current state, it is not fully processed, it's not fully matured. But we are to seek out that darkness, like during this time, where we seek out our own darkness so that we can transform that darkness. It is our duty and our responsibility to go after that darkness, seek it out so that we can repair and heal and elevate and transform and transcend that darkness, so that it is forever alchemized in the cosmos. Because as we've learned in physics, that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. That's the law of conservation of matter. And so if we were to take away anything in the cosmos, we would have a paradox. We would have a void. We'd have a vacuum. So everything has to be here to maintain the balance and the structure of it, and to maintain the physicality, because it was the fall of man that produced the physical world. Otherwise, we would have been in that light realm of perfection. And so here we have my scales over here that represent the cosmos and the light versus darkness. And so when we do our individual healing, and when we seek out our darkness, when we seek out our despair, our fear, our lack, our doubt, our uncertainty, our prejudice, our grudges, our bitterness, our lack of awareness, our lack of consciousness, when we seek that darkness out and we are successfully able to elevate that and transform that, then that forever changes the balance and tips the scales and progresses mankind forward. So each of us at our own individual level, our own individual healing actually does make the difference in the world. So holistically speaking, we are all integrated, we are all one, and everything has its right place to each other. To all things, there is a season, right? And was it David that said that? There's a season for reaping and sowing and war and crying and joy and dancing. There's a season for all things under heaven. And so, and a lot of Hanukkah has to do with maintaining purity and overcoming the oppressor's attempts at defilement, right? So we have this feast of Adam and Eve where we decorate the tree. Now, the Celts, their spiritual understanding of the tree was that the roots were like our resources and our depth and our deep potential and our roots of where we come from and what God gave us as our strengths and our inherent resources and qualities through our DNA and through our traits, that potential for what we have to make with in this life, for what we can do in this life. And the branches are that higher self, that higher consciousness, our higher potential that we can reach to. So the tree decorated with the fruits of the spirit, if you will, hint at the re-entering back into the garden when we correct for that original sin of Adam, when we are redeemed from that, when we go back into that union with divine, with creator, with God, we re-enter the garden, we re-enter that paradise, and we are one again, not separated by the veil of our ego that would cause us to feel shame and lack and doubt and separation and those dark things that separate us, that break our affinity with the light of the creator. We then are able to shed those parts of ourselves through self-sacrifice and be restored through the process of elevation and of the soul correction. So when we receive that truth, this is a tree of life. And her ways are ways of pleasantness, right? This is the wisdom. This is the path that King Solomon hints to when he talks about wisdom and describes her as a path, as a tree of life. So we have the tree of life here, and this is, if we can learn the tree, then we understand the interworkings of the soul as they relate to our relationship with life and the universe and the process and our purpose in it. So we are readmitted back into the garden. We fell from the garden with the onslaught of the difference of the knowledge of good and evil, of that contrast, right? And that broke our union with absolute perfection, where everything was all just one thing. It was all just unified light. We go through a process to rebuild that vessel, to reconnect with that tree of life, right? And so, there was one other connection with that revelation of that process of the reconnection, of the going through the path, doing that correction, of elevating the soul. Well, anyway, we bring it into our process this time of year. And so we've decorated the tree. And so as we embrace the darkness of our experience, that opens us up, as Alexander Shaia points out, to the revelation of the Christ, the gift of Christ, the birth of the Christ within us, the Savior coming into the heart to redeem us, to transform us, to change us. So it's usually in those dark times when we are broken. And he points out that the 4 Gospels are laid out in such a way that one gospel is about being broken. One is about feeling like you're wandering around aimlessly with no plan, no real direction, no clear answer, right? One feels like the work is never completed. It's never coming to its perfection. And one is about our constant walking and our service and the chopping wood and carrying water and the sustaining of it all. And so out of all of it, there is no clean answer or path or guarantee. It's like we're always on this journey. We're always on this path of giving, of not knowing exactly. the answer, or if it's never really complete, and we never are quite sure where we're going, but we're being led step by step by step, and we just keep showing up in our daily work and our daily devotion and our daily service and our daily sharing every day. We just keep showing up and we keep doing the work because every day is part of the journey, and it's never like truly complete. And so that we understand, how being broken becomes a gift. And it was through each of those gospels, through the challenge that each of the writer had, that the revelation came and the healing came. So interesting. So it's during these dark times, the darkness in our life, the darkness within ourselves, the challenges, the pain, the imperfection, the humiliation, the failure, all of it, the disappointment, the disillusionment, the uncertainty, the lack of answers, the lack of guarantees. It's in those times where we transcend this flimsiness of hope that projects, the answer outward, but we find the solidity of certainty of that connecting with the miracle of Christ and God in the presence of this moment in the now. Meeting it, embracing the darkness, not avoiding it, but going into it directly. Seeking it out, going right in so that we can face it fully, and it no longer has dominion or sovereignty over us, but we claim sovereignty over that in rising above that fear. And so then in that connection with the light of the Creator, in connecting with that light of miracles, we connect with that certainty that can only come from building our house not on the sand but on the rock, on the incorruptible nature of God, in knowing that God is in all things, that God is always with us through everything, and that God is never not present, and that God is everywhere in the cosmos, and the story of good news is resounding and being proclaimed everywhere in the heavens and in the earth. And so we find that light when we are in the darkest times, and we connect with that light during the darkest times. So Christmas morning, also during the time of being in the Garden of Eden, there was this particular light of the Creator that we were fully connected to, and it was called the Hor Haganuz, and it was the perfected light, the light in its absolute wholeness, and our unadulterated connection with it was absolute perfection. The light that is available to us during the time of Hanukkah is the light of the Or Haganuz. It is the light of miracles. It is the light of healing. It is the light of fulfillment. So during these 8 days, where we connect with this absolute joy and fulfillment and pure light of perfection, we can also pray for our healing and the healing of others. So we bring and we meditate as we look at the candles on the parts of our life that are feeling like we're in darkness, or for darkness that others are going through. We can pray for illumination and healing in those areas. So we have the Hor Haganuz, the union with God, the union of the intrinsic and extrinsic, the spirit and material, the masculine and the feminine, the holy sacred marriage, the bride and the bridegroom. Then Christmas morning, we have the birth of the Christ, the birth of the light that would now bring growing radiance into the world. And then on the third day after the sun's descent into darkness, it is resurrected. And to the naked eye, this is the first time we are able to perceive that the light is increasing again. So the light is born on Christmas Day. The Messiah, the Christ, is born on Christmas Day, and it portends the growing of radiance that is to come. On December 26th, this is currently known as the Feast of Stephen, which is Boxing Day. And this is traditionally a day when boys and men will go out and they will box up supplies, and they will take it to the widow, the sick, the homeless, the shut-in, and they will bring provisions to the poor in acts of service. Now we connect this as well. This is where Saint Stephen or Saint Nick, Santa Claus, was based on the fact that he's like this saint that went out giving to the poor, giving to the children. He was actually a saint that was, I think, of Albanian or Turkish descent. So this would have been in the lower part of what would be considered the Celtic northern hemisphere of the Christian evangelism in the earliest days of Christianity in like the 4th and 5th century. And Santa Claus, who Santa Claus was based on, was actually one of the members of the Nicene Creed. So like my mom was reading me this article on Christmas morning. It was so interesting. So Santa Claus was a saint that was, I think, of Turkish descent or somewhere around there. And he would go out and take provisions to the children and the widows and the shut-ins and those people. And he was also ended up sitting on the seat of the Nicene Creed. I can't remember. He was some understudy of a sage. I can't remember. He was very involved in the early days of Christianity. And so I thought that was really interesting too. Okay, so the Feast of Stephen, Boxing Day. So the early Christians created this feast day to mark the day that the Celts would take the boys and the men out on December 26th, and they would hunt down a wren, and they would slaughter it in the snow and spill out the blood into the ground as an act of paying an offering to the earth that would be regenerative and restore life and vitality to the earth. They were also seeing that the mystery of birth, which women and girls already know about, requires shedding of blood and the giving of the self and the shedding of the flesh. And so the boys would shed that blood and give back to the earth, regenerating and bringing forth new life for the return of crops and the sunlight. So the Christians translated this into something deeper, where we went into the sacrifice of the Christ and the sacrifice of the lower self, the sacrifice of the flesh, and the demonstration of this. And so as we sacrifice our lower nature, our lower self, the ego self, that the consciousness of the flesh, we then reveal more light in the world. We become better vessels of sharing the light. And so this too goes back into that cosmic description of transmuting your darkness into light to tip the scales and bring the more light into humanity. And so this is an act of demonstrating this as a truth, right? Bringing the feminine into the extrinsic, masculine and feminine, intrinsic into the extrinsic. So this is when the boys and men would start to put rations and things that people would need to survive winter, regenerative, nurturing, nourishing supplies, and they would take them out to the needy in acts of self-sacrifice to share with others. So interesting. So now the Feast of Christmas was actually there to parallel the 13-day feast of the goddess, to honor the goddess, to honor the mystery of birth. Well, the early Christians, I guess, were a little bit reluctant to have this full-on association. It's pretty radical. So they did the 12 days of Christmas, which started after the day of Christmas, which equals 13 days of Christmas. So, let's see. We have the, so the greater vessel of sharing. And then now we come to the 13th day of the Feast of the Goddess, which is the final day of the Feast of Christmas on January 6th, which is called the Feast of the Epiphany. And it is on the other side of the darkness that we go through that the illumination begins to come and the radiance returns, and we have our epiphany, right? We have the insight. And so I think this is so powerful this year, particularly because we have just come through the darkness of 16 years of Pluto's transit through Capricorn. And that was an intense karmic cycle that brought us to the end of an era that also ushered us into a new era of the age of Aquarius, the age of thinking not in terms of the self alone, but in terms of the greater good of humanity. It's just amazing that this is lining up this way this year. Okay, so the first epiphany was the birth of the Christ on Christmas. The promise of the redemption of mankind, the Messiah come to end pain and suffering in the world. And this is through the self-sacrifice of the Christian discipleship, of becoming more like the Christ, of self-sacrifice, of taking on the message that Christ was offering, and the message of love, union, brotherhood, acceptance, forgiveness, including everyone in the good news, and sharing and taking care of one another, and believing in our wholeness and our healing and our oneness, right? Which paves the way for miracles, and which allows us to do superhuman acts when we have a heart of sharing, and we are coming from a consciousness of sharing, and we are in a state of love, and we are also in a state of unity. There's almost nothing that can stop us. So the Christ message was here to liberate us from the oppression of the darkness, of the opponent, of the ego's hold that was keeping mankind in the dark ages and in separation and in division. And so Christ came as the Messiah to save the souls and the hearts of mankind, that would liberate you no matter what the conditions. You wouldn't be bound, because everybody was so obsessed that Christ was coming as like this war king like David, and he was going to overthrow the government. And that wasn't the revolution he was bringing. The revolution he was bringing would say, no matter what the conditions are, you will never be enslaved again, because no one can control your consciousness and no one can control your heart. And when you hear the truth that I'm telling you, that truth will set you free. And no matter what the outer conditions, no matter who's the king or who's in control or what the taxes are or what the state of the current conditions are, you will be liberated, you will be absolutely free, and you will be living in a state of inner peace and fulfillment, because your certainty will be in the Creator, and your vitality and your wholeness and your rock and your house will be built on that. And so that was going to set mankind free. And he said, bones will still break, but it was a deliverance from our spiritual suffering, our separation from the Creator. So the birth of Christ is the arrival of the Messiah, something that every person on earth, every Jew on earth had been waiting for all of the ages, since the beginning. This had been proclaimed since the Garden of Eden, the coming of the Christ, the coming of the Savior of all the souls of mankind, the correction of the souls of all mankind, the redemption. And so the birth of Christ brought on the first epiphany, which is that it is during the darkest times and the most bleak times that the birth of hope and renewal and newness and radical revolution and change comes. Not during the golden ages of comfort and security, right? So the second epiphany was the baptism of Christ. And when John the Baptist baptized Christ, that was a reference to Genesis. When Jesus went down into the water, the Hebrew idea of water is death, is the undoing, is formlessness, is chaos, is the abyss. In Christianity, we think of water as the purification, as the renewal, which it is, but it comes through the process of going down into the abyss, and the undoing does the purification. Death is the purification process, and the resurrection is the final step. So Christ goes down into the deep, into the waters of formlessness and chaos, and their spirit hovered over the waters. And so in Genesis, it was a reference to Holy Spirit like a dove flapping its wings over the waters. It was the Holy Spirit of the Christ descending down to earth to bring the goodness, to bring the good news, to bring the gospel, to elevate the souls of mankind out of the waters of formlessness, but into shape and into wholeness and into incarnation of life and beauty and order and the expression of our image. We were created in the image of God. God, the incorruptible substance of light. That is the core of our being. That is the core of our spirit, is the pure, incorruptible substance, the nature of God. The third epiphany is the wedding of Cana. And so back to going down into the abyss, that is also the foreshadowing of Christ's self-sacrifice and the death and hovering in the abyss of the undoing of the death, and then coming back up out of the waters, risen as spirit, Holy Spirit incarnate, the resurrection and the rebirth. And so same too with us, when we go down into the depths and into death and formlessness, and we go into the abyss of difficulty, of uncertainty, of this darkness, of this challenge, that is when we die to our flesh, our ego, our current perception, our current reality, and we are resurrected as a new creature of hopefully a redeemed higher consciousness that has been purified. Okay, so the wedding of Cana. When Jesus went to the wedding of Cana, he hadn't performed any miracles yet. So this was the first miracle that he performed that let people know that he was more than just this rabbi. He was starting to hint at the fact that he was the Messiah, and that the Messiah was here, and news was starting to get out. Like, people had heard of the birth of the Messiah, and the stage had been set, but they were still waiting for this to happen. They were still waiting for this to be a reality. What is the Messiah real? Is he going to show up? Who is this? The prophecies are told all throughout the Old Testament, foretelling the coming of this Messiah, but no one knows when it's happening. So the wedding of Cana was Jesus's first miracle that he performed, that set him on his journey and the ultimate path straight to the cross, to his death. So he knew this. He knew that when this process began, that his days were numbered, and the path was going straight to the cross. So the first miracle was at a wedding. And what Jesus did was he took these vessels that were made of stone. There were 6 stone vessels. So basically at the wedding, they ran out of wine. And it was going to be an absolute upset and ruinous for the family. And it was going to be humiliating. So it was part of the ritual, part of the spiritual essence of the event to have the wine there. So Jesus turned water into wine so that they would have wine for the wedding ceremony. The mysteries of the wine are described in more detail in the podcast, so you can listen to them. But the stone vessel, the reason why the stone was significant is that Hebrews understood stone as being an incorruptible substance. So when they needed to have a vessel that was incorruptible and pure for ritual purpose, they would use stone because of its incorruptible nature. Think about the wise man builds his house upon the rock, upon the incorruptible nature of God, understanding that that rock is the certainty that we build when our experience proves wisdom of the fact that God is unfailing, is unwavering, is eternal, is unchanging, right? When we understand the nature of God's immanence, then we understand that we can't affect it. It is the cause. It is uncorruptible. We are the changing ones. So we build our certainty, and the more you understand the rhythm of that relationship to that presence, you start to understand that it is actually predictably secure and stable, and you learn you can trust it, and you can have faith in it, and you can rest in that, and you can build and decide and make your decisions and take actions based on that. And so at the wedding, what happened, you had this vessel of incorruptible substance, which is our spirit, which is, God as the container of reality, and then our microcosm within the macrocosm of that incorruptible life force within our vessel. Then there's the water within that, which is life and death and mystery and the abyss and formlessness and life force and renewal and all of it. Purification, death, rebirth. And then there's the wine, which is the elevation of this life and death that we experience here, this abyss and this chaos and this life that we have through it, the mystery of birth. It becomes this higher elixir, this sweetened, this elevated form of experience with life that brings us into a spiritual Pentecostal inebriation, an elevated state of euphoria and fulfillment. So there we have the marriage of the spiritual radiance of divine married into the physical manifestation of Jesus the Christ, modeling what lies in potential for mankind if they follow the path of the Christ, if they take on the yoke of the Christ and the consciousness of the Christ. So let's talk about Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is a window of time, which is an 8-day period, and it's nestled usually between the solstice and Christmas at some point. And this is a window of time that marks an opening where we can connect directly to the light of Binah, the light of that supernal feminine, the light of that supernal mother energy, the 8th level, the 8th dimension, where we connect to that sustenance and fulfillment and blessing and abundance and life force. So what marks the holiday or the occasion on the surface initially is the celebration of, I think it was like the 3rd or 4th century BC, the Maccabees, which were a small band of Hebrews, defeated the Greek army, and this took 20 years. And basically what had happened was the Greeks came in, and the Jewish people were always being oppressed, and they were always being either enslaved or trying to be annihilated, or their religion was being defiled and messed with. And so the Greeks had come in and started to oppress them from being able to observe their traditions. And so all the temples had been desecrated and defiled, and they had defiled all the oils. So that, even if they were still there, you can do your worship, but the oils are defiled, and so they're impure, so your connection won't be successful. Symbolically speaking, this represented the ways that the Greek philosophy sort of started infiltrating the Hebrew consciousness, and it started to defile the faith and the purity of the connection and the practice. So the oils were defiled. And so the Hebrew people started losing their connection with the Jewish faith and tradition. And we have the written Torah, but we also have the oral Torah that had to be passed down. So the written Torah was divinely inspired, written down, solid, set in stone, permanent. You have it there. The oral Torah were the secrets and the underlying meanings behind what the written Torah gave us. And it's all these layers and all the practices and the Kabbalah and the symbolism and the spiritual technology behind it all. And so it had to be passed down from teacher to student, sage, down through the prophets. So at this point, the faith was dwindling, and there was a small group of people that were holding on to the faith, and they were reconnecting with it and trying to rejuvenate the tradition. And they happened to find in the effort that they were making to keep it alive and to keep it pure, to keep their connection with the Creator solid and pure and in union. Their efforts, they fought the Greek army for 20 years, but in that time, at the end of that 20-year mark, they found a vial of oil in the temple that had been untouched. It remained, this one remnant had not been desecrated. It was still pure, and it was still sacramentally okay. It was still sacred. It was still pure, had not been defiled. So they decided to observe their faith by lighting these temple lamps. And the oil was only enough to last one day, but it ended up burning 8 days, which they saw, okay, this miracle is here. And this restored the faith, that restored their connection with miracles. They remembered, oh yes, during this time, we have a connection to miracles. We can draw down miracles during this time. And that drawing down of the miracles, the lighting of the lamp, was what helped them finally defeat the army. Whilst at the same time, a woman named Hannah was being confronted by the Greek army, and they wanted her to make a sacrifice to the Greek gods. And she said, no way, Jose, I'm not doing it. So she and her 7 sons were sacrificed and martyred. And so they too equaled 8. And Hannah, her name was given to commemorate the day, but the letters the letters K and A, Kaf. Don't quote me. I do not know my Hebrew alphabet by heart. So, but the letters that end up being the Ka part of Hanukkah, geometrically speaking, numerologically, make the word Hannah into Hanukkah, which numerologically then is equivalent to the numerological value of the Tetragrammatron, the holiest unpronounceable name of God, which that unification is another example, another proclamation of our unification during this time, the masculine and feminine, the divine with the human, of our unification with the Creator in that sacred holy marriage. So, this miracle, the seeds for this lamp burning so long, were laid earlier when the patriarch Jacob, which I think it's the same Jacob who wrestled with the angel. And so when Jacob wrestled with the angel, it was at night. He wrestled all night with an angel. So in the darkness of not knowing, of uncertainty, he was wrestling with the forces of good and evil within himself. And he was wrestling with his soul and overcoming his darkness to transcend the lower nature of the ego, of the flesh, of the desire to receive for the self alone. And he was transcending that in order to awaken and reveal the light of his soul. So Jacob wrestled with the angel during a time of darkness and challenge, which left him with a wound at his hip. It left him with a limp. It left him. So too are we. When we go through these experiences, these times in life of darkness, of uncertainty, of challenge, where we wrestle with our darkness and our light, of our lower nature and our higher nature, are we going to descend into an origin story that is going to be our villain story? Or are we going to ascend into an origin story that is going to be our hero story? Right? Who are we becoming? And these experiences, although we have experienced and touched something miraculous within these times, because it's during those difficulties and those fearful moments where we also feel the presence of angelic support and of divinity and of the Creator in those times. We feel the presence of God with us. We feel the presence of Holy Spirit during those times, more so than any other. We have an experience, but at the same time, we are forever changed. We are forever given this limp, this different way of moving through the world after that, where we've seen things we cannot unsee, and it stays with us. It's a holy wound. Also paralleled with the description of the wound of Chiron, the sacred healer, right? Where we understand that what our wounds are the things that give us our revelation, our epiphany, our understanding. They break our hearts open for the Christ to do its work. And we are then transformed by our wounds. And as Rumi says, the wound is where the light enters, right? But the wound is also where the light enters so that it can be channeled through and shared again and shared with others. So the wound becomes our sacred wound, that becomes our gift, that becomes our light that we then transmute and share, which is also tied in to the assignment of Hanukkah. But we're not done with Jacob yet. So Jacob wrestles with the angel. So there is another, I don't know whether it's connected to this story, whether this is an entirely different Jacob or whether this is a different experience that same Jacob had. But in connection with the oil of the lamps, Jacob, just prefaced, not sure if this is the same Jacob or different Jacob. Jacob falls asleep on the rock. And when he awakes, he finds, to his dismay, this appearance of this vial of olive oil. He then says, oh, wow, this is given to me by the angels. This has been given me by the God, my Creator. I will pour some out onto this rock in appreciation and remembrance that everything that I am given is given to me by God, and I want to give a portion of that back. And so I think it's interesting that Jacob was asleep on the rock. Jacob found rest, God's peace, God's fulfillment on the uncorruptible nature of God, in his certainty in God, in that wisdom, in that discernment, in that experience of building that relationship that is so tight with the Creator that you feel that unwavering certainty that leaves you in such a state of security that you build your house, you build your consciousness, you build your life on that, you bet your life on it, right? And so then you can trust where God is leading you and directing you at any given time, right? So you can rest in that. You can rest in the certainty that God is with you through all things and that God can be activated and found within all things. And so when we are not avoiding our darkness, but when we embrace it and sit with it and don't project forward into the hope of when it will be over, but we go into the darkness and we wrestle with it head on, that is when certainty is revealed. That is when we can rest on the rock of uncorruptible faith and certainty. Certainty is faith beyond reason. Certainty is faith beyond what we can see. And certainty is hell of a lot stronger than hope. Certainty puts us in the now, and it puts us in our strength and empowerment because it puts us in connection with the Creator. So we learn to cultivate this certainty during this darkness. Let's see. Defiling, 20 years, battle, oral Torah. 8 corresponds to Bina, the gate of miracles and joy. Hannah and her son sacrifice themselves rather than be forced to betray their faith, and it equals 8. Okay. Before the Jacob fell asleep on the rock. Okay, so he awoke and he found this oil and he poured it out in appreciation. So then fast forward to Jacob having to flee his father-in-law's house. And as they left, they were like in danger, but he realized that, oh my gosh, in our haste, I had left behind a couple of vials of oil. And he realized the value of everything that God gives, everything that God provides, and does not want to waste or take for granted. So he goes back to show his reverence and appreciation for all that God provides. And he went back and grabbed the oils. We're not wasting the oil. I gotta go back for my oil. So he goes back and he saves the oil. He doesn't waste the oil. So that lays the seeds for the oil to last longer than it was ever supposed to. It transcended its physical limits and became supernatural because of the seeds that were already planted by Jacob. Now, going back even further, I can't remember if this was through the Kabbalah Center or what rabbi or teacher I heard speaking about this, but in the Garden of Eden, so the original miracle of Hanukkah was, the original seed was planted when in the Garden of Eden, after the garden had fallen into a physical state and Adam and Eve had to toil and they were starting to get used to life as human beings, as physical human beings, they noticed, because their birthday is in September when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. So that is the beginning of the fall time of year. So that is when the days are starting to become shorter. So Adam starts to notice, oh my gosh, like the days are growing shorter. This is completely because of us. I just know it. Like we're descending back into darkness because of the mistake that we made, because of our sin. It's not enough that we're here now doing penance. We're in separation from God. Everything is descending back into formlessness and chaos. I don't know what to do. So as the days grew darker and darker and shorter, Adam began to panic. And approaching the solstice, when the days were at their absolute darkest and longest, he was just like convinced that everything that he and Eve had done have completely ruined existence for all of mankind, and there would be no future, and life as they knew it would descend into darkness and formlessness once more. So Adam swore, he vowed that he would not eat again until the light returned. And so Adam fasted and prayed and ritualed and sang and danced for 8 days. He was just going to do it indefinitely until the light returned. But it was on the 8th day that the light began to return to the world, to the earth, where he could see, he could perceive that light returning. Now, he didn't understand the science behind the solstice and the tilt of the earth on its axis and everything. He hadn't been through the full calendar year yet, so he didn't know what to expect. But in that, he began the feast of what would be Hanukkah, and what would relate back to the fast that we do on Yom Kippur. But everything that we do on Hanukkah and Yom Kippur is to correct for that original sin of Adam, which all the souls of mankind, remember when we talk about things being mythically true in an archetypal level in this astral realm, well, Adam and Eve are the archetypal mother and father of the souls of all mankind. They represent mankind, masculine and feminine, archetypally incarnate. So the original seed soul of all mankind is Adam. And so during the fall of Adam and Eve, all the souls of mankind share that original sin. And so in all of our feasts and festivals and fasts, we pray to correct that sin, that we all share just a bit of it when we come here on the earth. We are given this like physicality and this density that was a little bit of the sin of Adam. that we each have as our rent for being on earth. And our assignment is to process that and transmute it and alchemize it in this lifetime and elevate those sparks of light back to the side of the light. So the Feast of Adam, the Hanukkah, ouch, sorry, I'm like sitting on my leg for too long. Ouch, oh, Charlie horse in my inner thigh. Oh God. Oh, locking up, fighting the light in my darkness here. So I will fast until this pain is gone, until the suffering has left me. Okay, there it goes. So Adam fasts for 8 days and prays in absolute solemnness until the light begins to return. And so then at his jubilation and appreciation for the light returning, he declares an 8-day feast of joy and celebration, of reconnecting with the light and celebrating the light. And so that's why on Hanukkah, our work is not the same heavy restriction as it is in other holidays, but it's about joy and jubilance and mirth and connecting with the light and hope and faith and the warmth of the Creator. So the Charlie horse is not gonna go away. Okay, so we look at the flame to connect with that pure light of the Or HaGanuz, the light when we were purely connected with Source, with no separation, with total union. When there was no pain and suffering, when there was no Charlie horses. Okay. So where does that bring us now? So during the time of Hanukkah, if you are a seeker and a spiritual student, the idea is to go into your darkness, to seek it out. What darkness lingers in me that I am ready to sacrifice, to elevate? What darkness do I have that I am ready to bring into light? What bitterness do I have that I can make sweet, right? And our bitterness comes from when we bemoan and resent the things that have happened to us. So this is when we can look back to all of the darkness, to all of the challenges, and actually appreciate what it's done and what it's created and what it's birthed within us. And that's when the new radiance comes with the epiphany, right? With that return of the Christ. So the idea and the assignment of Hanukkah is to take our darkness and bring it into light, where we were previously unconscious, and where we had darkness and despair and selfishness, where we were in our lower self. We bring light to that. And where we were bitter and disappointed and bemoan our fates, we actually embrace all that we've come through and all that we've been through and all that we've experienced and what it has created within us and what it has allowed to be birthed forth through us and within us, which is the promise of that Christ. When you can connect the dots and bring in the revelation of the Christ and the birth of the Christ within your heart, and then you put all this other stuff together, it's just like, it's absolute magic. It's absolute miracles. It's so awe-striking. And so during these 8 days, we connect with our appreciation of the everyday miracles that are already present in our life that we take for granted, right? The miracle of being able to breathe, to have a candle to light, to have hot water, to have the food that sustains us through these dark times, through the dark months, you know, the miracle of love and community and joy in our lives, right? There's so much we have to be grateful for, even if it's only the sunset or the sunrise, or the breath that we are taking in this very moment. So I think I will end there with our appreciation of miracles. Try to light a candle even if you don't have a menorah. When I did it at first, I only had like a Tupperware container that I put rice in, and I stuck my candles in that. They were like birthday candles. I just used whatever I had. So the point is to light the candle and just sit in simplicity and enjoy and look at the flame. You know, if you want to get more into it, the Kabbalah Center, Kabbalah.com, is live broadcasting their broadcast every night. So you can follow along with them if you want to do the traditional songs and do the food blessing. And then we also pray for maybe the aspects of our life that need light, that need healing. And we pray for others that we love as well. Maybe somebody that has, that you have, a desire for their healing as well. Bring them into your meditation. And then you look at the candles while they're burning for 30 minutes, because it takes 30 minutes to penetrate the outer buildup of humanity on our souls and get through into that deeper level. And that's usually about the time that the candles burn down all the way. And so, yeah, just sit and candle gaze and connect with the light and appreciation. All right, y'all. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Solstice, Happy Feast of the Goddess, and Happy Feast of Epiphany. And I will see y'all on the next one tomorrow for our weekly energy oracle forecast, where we will be looking at the spiritual energy and weather for the next 7 or 8 days or so. All right, ciao.